what companies are asking for is to say, well, we want to use generative AI and we want to be able to be safe and secure.
Hi, welcome to AI Confidential. I'm Aaron Fulkerson, the CEO of Opaque. This is the podcast where I sit down with industry experts to talk about the promise and potential of AI to create breakout industry leaders or to disrupt the current leaders. After all, whoever controls the data controls the industry. For this episode, I met with Teresa Tung, Senior Managing Director and Global Data Capability Lead at Accenture. Accenture is arguably the global leader in driving AI adoption over the last year or so, and Teresa's role gives her a really unique perspective that's exciting to hear. In this episode, we discussed everything from why trusted AI requires trusted data to how generative AI has changed the entire landscape for businesses across every industry. And we covered specific use cases for confidential AI. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you do, please subscribe to AI Confidential wherever you get your podcasts, and be sure to subscribe to our newsletter. Thank you for tuning in. Hi, Teresa. It's wonderful to see you again. It's always a pleasure to catch up with you. And I'm grateful for you taking the time to talk to us today on AI Confidential. You are the Global Data Capability Lead at Accenture, and you're doing all manner of super exciting things at Accenture.
Hi, Aaron. Thank you for having me. I think I do have what could be one of the best jobs at Accenture. I get to look at the data capability, which I think is the hottest place right now because we know that your data is really needed for unlocking AI.
Well, Accenture has really been on the absolute vanguard of generative AI innovation, or really just AI innovation, arguably being the global leader across every industry in driving innovation with AI. And for evidence of this, for those of you listening, just go look at Accenture's quarterly financial filings. They break out their AI services revenues. The growth of Accenture's generative AI business alone is nothing short of astounding. So I know you're not going to see that, Teresa, so I'll say it for you. As you said, I think that you're in probably one of the most exciting jobs on the planet today, at least related to AI. Can you share some of your responsibilities at Accenture and some of your recent contributions to the AI market?
Yeah, so Accenture, we've done over 1,800 generative AI implementations to date. And I think clearly you can't have an AI conversation without talking about this latest generation, right? Generative AI. And I think that is something to be proud of. We're moving companies beyond a period of experimentation, right? So last year, as generative AI was coming up, every company a bit scared from the previous digital generation. So all companies mobilized to understand what this means for their business. But there was a lot of proofs of concepts, right? Things that didn't really lead into value, and being able to have where I sit pretty much across a number of different clients across industries. It's a really great place to see this transformation and to be a part of it, right? I'm just super lucky to be able to sit from this vantage point and see what's scaling and to be able to also see what's not working and to apply those lessons learned.
Companies that we're seeing in market today, we're seeing a consistent theme around being able to control the data and the models. I mean, models are really just data, but it really comes down to controlling the data is going to determine the winners and losers in every industry. And in particular, over the next 5 years, I just think it's going to be wild to see what happens, because we're going to see former industry leaders really break out and own industries. And then some are just going to completely implode because they weren't able to manage the control of the data. So everything's really shaking out to be based on the ability for a company or organization to control the data. And that's exactly what AI Confidential is examining, is the intersection of AI and business disruption. And where we see the business disruption most starkly is about data sovereignty and innovation. So you have a saying that speaks to this, which is trusted AI needs trusted data. Can you explain that phrase, what it means to you and why it's so important?
Yeah, 100%. Without trusted data, the things that you're scaling and the insights that you're finding, how do you know that it's meaningful, right? In fact, that's one of the biggest inhibitors for being able to use AI at all, especially this latest generation. We did a survey just this year of 2,000 CXOs. And we found that 75% of them, they understood that high quality data, trusted data was really needed to unlock their generative AI ambitions. For the remaining 25%, they need to be aware that without trusted data about your business, about your people, your products, your processes, how are you going to make any decision that's relevant for you that you can action on, right? So trusted data, quality data is really, really key. The same survey, we found that 48% of these companies, these executives, they didn't have data of the right quality. They didn't have trusted data that they needed to be able to activate an operational generative AI. So we know it's important. Many companies don't have it. And so this is really, as you were mentioning, Aaron, it becomes a competitive advantage. Companies that have the data are going to be able to see in their business and to be able to do something about it using AI. Companies who have this data, it's going to be its own source of monetization because we know these models that have been pre-trained and created, they've used pretty much all the open data that exists, right? All the internet data. And that's why it can answer any question probably a third grader can, right? That's kind of the internet level of sophistication. But anything around your business or your industry and your function, you won't be able to see in it and others won't be able to see in it without that data.
Yeah, so it's common knowledge that companies and organizations must adopt AI just to be competitive. And what you're describing around having trusted data could be due to the quality of data or the sensitivity of data that prevents them from adopting it in production. So we see a lot of companies get stuck in this experimentation or pilot phase and unable to move into production. What are some of the real world examples that you're seeing of where AI adoption is stalled due to data sensitivity?
Yeah, I think data sensitivity is a great place to start because, when we talked about trusted data and quality data, some places you're not even capturing data, right? You're not even digitized. It's a lot of emails and Excel, possibly even faxes in some industry. So clearly there's a lot of work to be done. But your sensitive data, this is data around your finance, your HR, the key parts of your business, your transactions. Those are places that companies have traditionally invested. In fact, some of your best quality data is probably this highly sensitive data that it's sensitive so you can't use it for AI, right? It's so important that you need it to power your business, but it's also so important that it becomes so sensitized that it's very hard to apply at scale. So an example would be, some of the work that we're doing with a automotive manufacturer, right? So you could imagine that as we are using generative AI or enabling AI with their dealerships, the dealerships should be able to ask questions about their customers. But if I'm, bought my car with one dealer and then I'm trying to get my car serviced with another, I want to make sure that in that scenario, I'm allowed to access Teresa's personal data, right, about my driving and my car and things like that. And so in that sort of scenario, the use case is there, but traditionally even making that data shareable, and especially now with generative AI, because it's so easy that it's not just data scientists using the data, but it's somebody within the dealer themselves. At the end of the day, it's to help me as a customer to improve my experience and help me get my job and my errands done faster. But I really need to be able to tap into that. So being able to tap into that sensitive data in a way that is not just a legal agreement, but actually has the right controls. And in this case, quite dynamic in that, it's not just a rule that you can't actually see the data unless you're associated with the dealership. In this case, because I'm getting my car serviced, that's a really good reason why that dealer should see my data.
Yeah, this is a great example. So we see a lot of companies that they'll build a pilot project using sensitive data. And then when they go to move into production, it stalls like you're describing, because it's like, whoa, wait a second. We don't know for certain. We can't verify that this data isn't going to leak or the wrong person's going to see it. And it could have downstream consequences in terms of creating competitors or disruptors in our market. And then in some cases, what we see is companies will move forward with AI projects, but not using the trusted data or the high quality data. And then what happens is in production, it flounders because of a lack of adoption, since the data quality is just so poor that people don't adopt the AI project or the generative AI application. So how can companies build trust in AI when it involves their most valuable, yet also their most sensitive data?
Definitely the basics is really still around data accountability and governance. I know I think governance sounds too much of a data term, but when I think about trusted data and thinking about products, right? I know as an industry, we've been talking about data products for a long time. I think it's still a great analogy. When you buy a real product, there's an implicit trust behind it. It's implied that both the retailer and the producer of that product have done things to ensure that it's safe to use, right? That possibly you're doing the best practices from a labor and sustainability perspective, right? As consumers, we're starting to hold these companies to that sort of standard. We understand the lineage and they're giving us a great product that serves a job to be done, right? So that's what we expect with real products. I think taking that same lens to data and AI, right, is a great way to think about it. So thinking about, again, there's the right accountability from the business as well as the tech that this is trusted. It serves a purpose. It's meaningful. I think the sensitive data part needs to be addressed, right? So now we're saying data is so meaningful for AI that you're not just going to use it within the data org, even dealerships, right? We're using this data. So it's people who hadn't been trained with data. And it is some of the most sensitive finance PI data that we talked about in my previous example. So in this case, being able to think about programmatic protections, just like you might have programmatic protections when you build a real supply chain for a product, right? So having things that allow me to protect programmatically my confidential data, being able to programmatically attest the models and the use cases of my data so that I can have a different contributors of the data versus different contributors of the model at the end to be able to produce a result. Just like I have a real product and I can see the raw materials and then the different processes that are coming in to make that product. In the same way, I want to do my AI. And so I think some of the work that you've been working on in Opaque that allows us to use this new class of confidential computing, that's been around, but being able to have your compute run on this encrypted data, so it's protected, but then also to be able to attest and check, the different data that contributes to the output and the different models that contribute to the output, right, of that data product or the AI insight. I think that's something that is going to need a lot more of that to be able to scale just like we do with real products.
Yeah, the key point that you're making here, which is a growing and recurring theme, which is data is a product and you have to product manage the data. Gartner's doing a big push around this. Most companies who are the most innovative in AI, thereby being the most innovative in their industry by virtue of that statement, they're treating their data assets like a product and product managing it as such. It's interesting because it's less obvious to folks, but what we're seeing is in any industry, there's going to be distribution partners and supply chain partners. Whomever is capturing and managing that data from distribution partners or supply chain partners will control that industry. So if you aren't thinking about this in terms of data is a product, you've got to be, in fact, it's arguably the most valuable product that the company has, because with the advancement of AI, that data will likely determine how they distribute the product more effectively tomorrow, or how they produce the physical products, right? Their core products by using the data, how they'll distribute it more effectively, and then also how they'll manufacture it more effectively. And if you aren't controlling that data, then somebody in your industry who is going to disrupt you on the distribution side or disrupt you on the manufacturer side with the supply chain data. I love that concept of data is a product that requires product management. You touched on another important point, which is attestation of the data usage and the model. So confidential computing has proven to be really a critical foundational technology in this new AI age, particularly because of what you just said, being able to attest the use of the data so you can control it, or the model and so you can control it. How do you explain confidential computing to clients?
So with confidential computing, right, we're really looking at almost being able to cook without being able to see, right? So right now, when you need to share data, it's a legal agreement, right? I'm going to make an agreement with my partner to be able to bring the data together, possibly in a clean room, right? We might even isolate that environment and even isolate who gets to be able to see the data. But at some point, I need to trust whoever's in that clean room and working with the data. So they need to be able to see the ingredients, right? They're going to be able to see the data in the clear. And in that clean room, no matter what you do traditionally, you have to decrypt the data, right? So we as an industry always encrypt the data when it's at rest and in motion. But when you have to compute, you have to decrypt it. And sometimes that barrier that people will see the data to be able to do the data science, people who have to have an environment that's has the data in the clear, no matter what that environment is, those are points of risk, right? Those are points of risk that just because of how it's operated. So with confidential compute, these are technology solutions that address both of those issues, right? So one is the data can stay encrypted through the compute cycle. And so that means that, you're not able to see the data. So that's why I'm saying the cooking without being able to see the ingredients, right? You're going to still get the right output of the compute at the end, but you didn't need to see all the individual parts of the data to be able to, reduce the risk, right? Because you're not seeing some of those details itself. You might just need to see something in an aggregate. So as an example, let me talk about something we've done with a set of telcos, right? So this number of telcos, we're trying to look at cyber attacks. We want to be able to reduce that. And you could imagine if one way to do this is to share data all in the clear, right? But by doing that, I would actually expose a lot of sensitive information. I would see people's IP addresses. I would see people's internet use. This is very sensitive data. So even though it's to protect our overall population from cyber attacks, right, it's actually at the trade-off of some of this confidentiality. Instead, what we've done together with Opaque is using confidential compute. So each of the telcos in this story can encrypt their data, right? So it's as if you're obfuscating those ingredients that we're going to cook with. But then we are trying to get and identify these patterns, right? These patterns of attacks that is going to impact the entire network usage. And so by having these algorithms that we agree to run on together, when we find let's say it's my IP address, that's the culprit. That's when we can all agree to see the data in clear, right? So in this case, we still get the protections and can run all sorts of algorithms that we want in this environment, but we're still giving the protections of that data sharing. So you get the benefits of the insights, and you also get the benefits with the attestation of the models, right? So I might have different parties also contributing the models that's detecting, in this case, the suspicious activity. And all of these parties, right, can now make sure that when the insight is found, right, we can all be also tracked, right? We know whose data contributed. We know whose model contributed. And this is also really key, one, just for the sharing, but two, for the potential for monetization, right? So whether it's direct or indirect monetization, being able to track whose models, whose data contributed to finding the right insight, that is really key, because I think otherwise without that, I'm really trusting that other party with when I'm giving you a copy of my data, that's a big barrier for many companies to overcome.
Yeah, you just touched on a bunch of important points. I'm grateful that you bring up the telco example, because as you mentioned, it's an Opaque shared customer with Accenture. But the thing that I thought you said that was really useful to a layperson who doesn't understand confidential computing is confidential computing enables you to have a cook prepare meals without seeing the underlying ingredients. So there are technologies like data clean rooms or techniques like data masking that hides the ingredients to some extent. The problem with taking that approach is twofold. One, it hurts the quality of the AI workloads you can generate because you're lowering the fidelity of the data. by minimizing the capabilities in the clean room or by masking the data, which lowers the data fidelity. Second, you can't prove, there is no ability to attest that the data was kept in control or the model was kept in control. So invariably, data's going to leak, and a legal agreement is insufficient because, let's take an example. Let's say that I'm a music label that's producing artists. I build product that I distribute through Spotify, Apple Music, and Meta. We had a legal agreement that that's my data, but is it really? I didn't understand at the time that we entered into that legal agreement the ramifications that you're going to be able to understand at an atomic or molecular level the customer engagement around beats per minute and major key, minor key, a mathematical representation of the product that my artist produced. And you'd be able to create a social graph associated with that. So now you have all of this data that I never even understood that allows you to become a much better distributor of my product. So my partners, my artists, why would they sign a contract with me? So now, even though I had a legal contract, I'm suing all of my distribution partners. This is a quick Google search away to figure out who I'm talking about. So these companies across every industry, this isn't just about music. This is about, let's say it's auto manufacturing. The same thing. I have partners through automation services, for example, that are helping me to manufacture my cars or my widget. There's data exhaust that flies off of that that's going to allow people to come disrupt my industry. And this isn't some kind of science fiction future state. This is happening right now. So industry leaders are going to they're going to implode, becoming patent trolls, suing their distribution or supply chain partners over the next 5 to 8 years and go the way of Kodak because they couldn't control their data. And if you're the chief data analytics officer for one of these companies and your explanation is, well, we had a legal agreement, it's just insufficient when the entire future of your $20 billion a year business is built upon the data that you're leaking all over the place. So to your point about confidential computing allowing you to cook with ingredients you can't see, that's precisely what Opaque's enabling with the telcos and exactly what every industry has to figure out using confidential computing, like you described, is how do we attest that our data is not being leaked, or our models that we spent hundreds of millions of dollars or algorithms developing, that's not going to leak.
This just becomes even more important with generative AI, right? Because even just the discussion we talked about supply chain, we talk about telcos, possibly customer 360. Not one company can see the full picture by themselves. Each has a very strategic product, a data product to contribute. But if I were to give this to you in the clear, like you mentioned with the music example, I'm giving up a lot of future use cases in addition to the use cases that we've identified at the moment. And so being able to have something like confidential compute, a programmatic way that protects the data, and we're really attesting it and we're unlocking it per use case, right? Per insight. And that gives us a great way to also future proof that we can, again, we can protect this valuable asset that we've invested in having the right business processes, the right places to capture, to curate. Like that's our protection of this asset that we have.
Yeah. The point you made about generative AI, that's the key point, right? Because with generative AI, I can take a partial data set from one partner and then put it through an LLM and it will fill in the gaps that I didn't have. And we're seeing famous examples of this around generative AI re-identification attacks on mass data sets. All data masking and obfuscation techniques are now obsolete. Raluca, from one of our founders at Opaque, who's a professor at UC Berkeley, and you know her very well, of course. Her researchers at the Skylab started speaking with to a model using a Caesar cipher, and the way it responded was to use the Caesar cipher as the mode of communication back to the researchers. So they didn't train it. They didn't say, I'm going to use a Caesar cipher. They just simply spoke to it, communicated with it using a Caesar cipher, which is effectively the same as like a data masking technique, right? And it immediately knew what they were doing and communicated back to them in the form using the same cipher.
That's pretty scary. And it makes your point that the traditional techniques we use to protect sensitive data, including masking and synthetic data, those become much, like you said, obsolete, right? We need to rethink that in the age of Gen AI. And luckily, I think there's a solution here, right, with some of the confidential compute. So it's not just all scariness. I think we also have a path forward.
Yeah, I agree. On the topic of confidential computing, like you said, it's been around for 6 or 7 years, but how much awareness is there in the market, in your experience, for this technology? And do you and your team have to educate customers about it?
Yeah, 100% we have to educate, because very few have come saying, I want some confidential computing. I'm sure people who are listening to the podcast,
I got to get some confidential computing. I've never heard it before.
Every cloud providers have these trusted execution environment. Just like I have a VM that has a GPU, has a big memory, I can get something that can run confidential compute at the hardware layer. Right? The sort of software layer that Opaque has created that allows you to do the model attestation, all the sort of data attestation, the model management. That's something that it needs to be added to it. So very few companies are asking for this. What companies are asking for is to say, well, we want to use generative AI and we want to be able to be safe and secure. We don't want to have our data leak. Right? We want to be able to scale generative AI use across the company, and having different parts of the company being able to safely ask and answer questions, but without having them see data that they shouldn't be seeing. It is about being able to, like in the example with the telcos, is to work with your partners to be able to see a bigger picture, not using generative AI, right? I just want to be able to see, are these attacks happening? It could be the same thing with anti-money laundering, right? It's being able to see a bigger view than any one bank could see by themselves. It could be with the different retailers being able to see common, customer buying behaviors, but still being reluctant to share actually details about my specific customer. So being able to cook without seeing the ingredients means that I can see all these insights that's going to benefit, society pretty much as a whole, but not putting any one company's pretty much their livelihood, right? That is their core competitive advantage that we started the whole podcast with, right? The data is the competitive advantage. We need to make sure people can protect how it's being used and a means to monetize that insight.
I was speaking with Mark Rusinovich, the CTO of Azure, who's in an episode of the AI Confidential as well. And we were discussing that confidential computing will just become computing, right? It'll be just a flip you switch, or a switch you flip. And it will give you a layer of protection. And all the hyperscalers have some of these, like you've got GCP, AWS, and Azure. They all have some confidential computing primitives. And then you see vendors like Databricks, who we are a little sibling of, because some of our founders are founders of Databricks. So no hate on Databricks. We love them. But they packaged a CVM. Packaging Databricks as a CVM and running it in a hyperscaler that supports confidential computing doesn't really give you much. It gives you some increased security, but in order to truly protect and product manage your data, you need to be able to do attestation, right? And to do attestation requires refactoring your application, your AI workload, and your data pipeline. Or naturally, of course, you're going to use Opaque, but that's going to be the next wave that we're going to see, is people building refactored applications to do attestation of not just the data and the model, but probably of their code too. So as part of the build process to prevent people from having like the SolarWinds hack, for example. Are you seeing, I know that you're more on the data side, but are you seeing people refactor applications for attestation already? Are you seeing that in the field?
I think we'll see more of it, especially as we think about that software supply chain, right? Just like we talked about the data supply chain. These are all pretty much interlinked, right? Your data and AI is written with software. A lot of the techniques we're learning from data and AI to be more agile is coming from software. So I think we'll see much more interdisciplinary in these spaces. I think the attestation that you mentioned is really, really key. The supply chain that we talked about, it's not going to run properly until you have, we talked about business accountability, right, in the beginning, right? That was one of the things that you had to get right. But again, the tooling that comes is right after that. So just like we do, we've moved to microservices. We have CI/CD capabilities. We know we encrypt the data at rest and in motion, right? This is just the next layer of that, having that data encrypted, the software encrypted, right? The models encrypted. This just should become part of that new norm. I do look at things almost like this is a requirement because we're going to be multi-party. The way we worked as an industry has largely been siloed, right? We've been siloed within a domain, so within an application or within a part of the business. As we now move to be able to use software, data, AI across the business, and especially with partners, there's no choice but to add this protection in, right? Otherwise, it's putting you too much at risk or you're giving away your IP and your differentiation.
We're going to definitely see more use cases where data is across multiple parties in a supply chain or through distribution partners back with the product manufacturers. What are some interesting use cases that you're seeing? The telco one around finding emerging cybersecurity threats is a great one. But could you give us a couple more interesting use cases that you're seeing in the field?
I mentioned a little bit about retail. I think that's a very interesting one. So if you think about retailers, especially ones that are co-located, think about like a shopping mall, right? In that case, all the different retailers, they're like frenemies, right? They're both competitors, but also they collaborate because they want people to come to the shopping mall so that everybody can benefit from these customer engagements. But your specific customer loyalty data, right? Things about Teresa and what I buy, right? That is competitive advantage, especially as some of these retailers sell similar things. And so one of the cases that we've done, and again, made possible because of confidential computing, it's not just a promise to say, we're allowed to share data and only these people can see it. Right? Your data lake or mine is probably not a conversation you're going to win. So instead, we're going to say we're going to be able to protect this using confidential compute. And then we can actually test a lot of these different hypotheses and understand which offers we want to make. And then we make the offers to those customers that meet the criteria, or we understand the buying trends that's going to impact the industry as a whole. So I think that's an example of a case of multi-party compute. I think another one that I really like is from a product manufacturer perspective. So this is an industrial product manufacturer, and they make products that live in buildings, right? It's your cooling, your power systems for any sort of building, like data centers, manufacturing plants, office buildings. And their customers, right, the owners of these buildings, they're demanding. They're saying, we want you to be AI powered because that's how we know the future is. These very same customers are saying, oh, but we don't want you to use our data, right? Our data is so sensitive. You can imagine a data center operator. Even how they adjust their cooling and their power is so much their IP and how they will differentiate their operations that they don't want to share it even with this close partner of theirs, yet they're still demanding AI-powered capabilities. So how are you going to allow us to create the AI capabilities without being able to see the data? That's exactly the case that we just described around confidential compute. Could we allow them to use the data to create AI insights as long as we guarantee we can't see it in the clear? And I think that's another sort of use case that we weren't able to do before, right? Because it was just so sensitive, and the same with the retailer is just so sensitive, and now we can.
That's a great example. I'll come up with one, but it's kind of an odd use case because it's more of a consumer play than enterprise where you and I typically operate. I was speaking with a friend who's a very well-known lawyer who specializes in class action lawsuits. And he's been practicing law for 35 years. He's had people approach him for his casework from 3+ decades. And they want to purchase the data. It's incredibly valuable. He's world renowned for his class action work. So he could sell it to someone, or he could lease it, right? He could put it into an opaque environment that others can build into RAG implementations for their generative AI, but protect the data so that they can't see the data. This would allow him to monetize or lease it in perpetuity as he goes into retirement instead of doing a one-time sale. It's kind of like, do you want to sell your house, or do you want to lease your house and rent it out? It's one of these things that we're going to see confidential computing unlock for people in ways that they build new business models that they never even thought were possible to build. So looking forward into the future, like 5 years from now, give us a prediction on where you see confidential AI going. Like what do you see, and maybe it's 5, 10, whatever you think, like if you can dream into the future, what interesting applications or business values unlocked from the ability to do confidential AI? Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think we're hoping it's much sooner than 5 years, right? I think within 3 years, especially as companies mature into their AI ambitions, we just believe this is table stakes, right? If you're going to be using data, as I mentioned, beyond that silo of your business, you need to have something that isn't only a promise and some training, having something programmatically protecting your data. And I think the driver will be some of this competitive advantage through to these more direct or, monetization. So it could be, as you were mentioning with your lawyer friend, right? That's a direct monetization channel with their data. It could be just because we're supply chain partners, or, we're doing that retail sort of story. We need to have better ways of collaborating together, or reduce risk as an industry. So more indirect monetization. But these are really key. The next phase of business really is around unlocking these sort of digital data assets. And Gen AI is that driver, because as I mentioned, I think a lot of these models have tapped out, like we're tapped out of the data that is easily accessible. So the data that remains, that's going to differentiate and even be able to validate, can I use the models? Can I create relevancy specific to my business or my industry and my function? All of that is in these proprietary sets. So making sure that if you're going to make the investment, which it is, like we talked about, you have to digitize, you have to capture, you have to clean, all of that still remains true. So how can I protect and maximize the value? It is using something like confidential compute.
Yeah, it's the analogy I've been giving people is, imagine that your data is your house and people just randomly come in and live in it without paying you. So all of these, so there's companies that we're working with in the financial sector who have historical data, like in bond markets, that nobody else has. So that's their house. Now, they can deploy it using confidential AI and monetize it, or they can open their door and let any random person come live in their house. It's just a no-brainer. Of course, this is going to be what happens. That they're going to, like you said, it's table stakes. I think what we're going to see happen, Teresa, is like right now you see Opaque is one of, I think, probably the only purpose-built confidential AI tool that allows you to take Spark or Python and deploy it. There's other infrastructure plays and dev tool plays. We're going to see a proliferation of tools like Opaque, and I expect they'll probably specialize around specific industries and use cases. And then we're going to end up seeing a registry of confidential AI services and confidential AI data sources. And people will connect to this registry to identify proprietary data sources that are being served that they can tap into and purchase. And then also specialized services that they can use to build applications with. I think that's what we'll likely see in the next 3 to 5 years, on top of what you've already described. Like, you're right, it's table stakes. Like, everybody's deploying this. There's a mad rush. Like, I've been in technology for, 20 something years. I've never seen so many secular tailwinds driving adoption of a technology like this. It's been a wild ride in my 1 year at Opaque so far.
Well, hang in there, and we're going to have a good time.
It's great. It's great to be working with you guys at Accenture. You guys are literally leading the world in generative AI adoption. It's incredible what you guys have been accomplishing. How about wave a magic wand? Looking back at the end of this fiscal year for Accenture, what do you hope to have accomplished in your role at Accenture?
Oh, that's a hard one, I guess. I think the trusted data is still really key. We still have a lot of folks within industry who either have a couple of, fallacies. They're thinking that with this new generation of generative AI, you don't need to invest as much in their data. I mentioned 25% of companies didn't have that as their top thing to do. I think that needs to be changed, right? That is where, if anybody's investing anything, it's not foundation models, it's not training or responsible AI. Get your data done right. You're not going to regret that. I think then the other part would be thinking about, how do you actually now put this into scale? We know how to do this. And as we were just saying, nobody's been calling and banging on the door asking for confidential compute, but they are saying, how do I make it secure? How do I make it so that I can use it at scale? I have all these concerns and these risks. The good news is we have something that addresses that. I think those 2 points, need to be better understood.
I'll summarize in my own word. It's the data, stupid. Right? Yes. It really is. It's the data that allows you to differentiate your AI workload from your competitors. And it's the data that you've got to protect your control and ownership of, that's going to allow you to have a bright future or be completely disrupted and implode. It's really the data. Thanks again for taking time with us here on AI Confidential. It is sincerely a delight to catch up with you on all of the amazing projects you guys are driving at Accenture.
Thank you, Aaron, for having me, and looking forward to the work we're doing together with Opaque.